Trust. It's one of the most difficult things to gain and to build. However, it is also one of the easiest things to destroy. Hello, my name is Nathan Gentry, and I'm here to talk to you about the need to trust in God no matter what. When I was in the Air Force back in 2009, I began having a series of unfortunate events. I dropped a crane, I hurt an individual. It's just bad things over and over and over. And there was nothing I could do about it. Well, to what I thought. I never really prayed about it. I never really asked God for any help whatsoever. I just figured I could do it myself. And that was the wrong course of action. When I got to my final duty station after those events, I really didn't know where else to turn. And I met an individual there. His name was also Nathan. He brought me back to God. Took me to an amazing church, and everything started working out better in my favor. I was given an opportunity to do the same exact job I did in the Air Force as a civilian, just because I allowed God back into my life and I trusted in Him. Now, moving to that job, this was something that I don't normally do. I mean, the Air Force has moved me. I knew where I was going. I knew I had a set job. Getting there, I didn't. When I moved to Texas, I didn't know what was going to happen. They even told me in the job interview that I needed a second interview after I'd gotten here, and I wasn't prepared. I got the job, thank the Lord, but it was rough. But I trusted in God, gave Him everything, and He allowed me to overcome and persevere what I had to. Moving on to the more of a trust subject is trusting in others. That is probably one of the most difficult things to do, especially in my career field. I work with munitions. I can't just sign someone else's work off willy-nilly. I have to visually see them install the munition onto the ejection seat. I have to visually watch them change the fracture line on a canopy. I can't just take someone's word for it and hope for the best. There's too much at stake. There's a life at stake. There's a father, a mother. It is someone else's life that's in my hands when I do this. So trusting in others is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my life. I'm getting better at it. I trust my wife more than anything. But other than that, trust is a very slim thing with me. Giving it all to God. It seems easy. Yet, back in our head, we still worry. We still fret, freak out. It happens. We're humans. I hate to, use my humanity as a crutch. However, I'm just human. I mean, I'm not like the birds. I'm not like the grass. I worry. Because I have that, mental capability of being able to do that. It's not as easy to give everything to God and just let it be. I know numerous people that do that just try to give it all away, and yet they're still worrying, still freaking out. That's why I've honestly found it's easier to just share with people as well, more in a prayer group, because then other people know you have help from all sides, from God and from the people around you. Trusting in God, this kind of goes hand in hand with giving it all to God. if you don't trust in God, how you can't give anything to him. I trust God. I know that he has a plan for my life. I have physically seen it with the series of unfortunate events that befell upon me. Everything worked out, and everything just keeps getting better because of God. I mean, I work hard because of God. I'm able to go to work because of God. This is all his will, and I trust that. If he has another plan for me, I'm going to trust that. I might freak out a little bit because, again, going back to the human nature, however, I'm still going to trust him, and I'm still going to go and do what he wants me to do. That's just, what I have to do. And I've never been one to really rely on anyone else except for God. He is the only one that I've really been able to rely on. Well, and my wife. I rely on her, but again, I thank God daily for bringing her into my life. But other than that, I'm not really able to rely on many people. So I thank God that I at least have a close-knit circle that I can rely on. This brings me to another story. This happened when I was in high school. I played football for a few years, and it was my first year playing as a freshman. We were in our championship, not the full state, just our little division championship. And before every game, we'd have our prayer, and we would even say in our prayer, we're going to give it all to God. It's God's will what we do with this game. Even though we knew better, and our coach didn't believe that for 1 second, because it's football. That's all he, breathed, slept, and ate was football. So it was when God's will or not. That's just how it was with him. But we had a quarterback. He was having a rough time. He was not doing well that game. We were doing all right, but he himself, if it wasn't for the offense and the defense that we had, we would have gotten slaughtered because he was not on his A game that day. But at the very end of the game, our last play, this was win or lose. Our chaplain that we had on the sidelines told him to just give it to God. Let him do it. Let him, take it off your shoulders. And they prayed about it. He went out there and he threw his pass. It doesn't matter if we won or lost. It matters that he gave it to God. He allowed God to take that off his shoulders. And no, I'm not telling you if we won or lost. It doesn't matter. Moving into the proposition of my class is we must always trust in the Lord no matter what. Just like Abraham did with Isaac, he trusted in God. We trust in God every day. At least I hope we do. But Joseph trusted in God. Noah trusted in God. All of these people trusted in God, even if they didn't follow, just like Samson. Samson wasn't 100%, with God. He just didn't cut his hair. But at the end, he still trusted in God and asked for his help. We just have to trust that God's going to do right by us. We know he is. The mental plane that we live in, we can never understand actually how God works. It just doesn't. We just can't fathom it. We can try. And by all means, with the Bible in hand, we can strive to be as Christ-like as possible, but we will never be able to understand fully how, you know, God works. It's just, it's a miracle. So, and going into that, God is always working, even in the worst situations. I mean, like my series of unfortunate events constantly befalling upon me. Every time I turned around, something bad was happening. And yet, God was still there. And I thank Him for it. Then and now. That's one thing that you'll run into with a lot of people is you've only got one or the other. When everything's going great and good, they'll thank God and they'll praise God for everything that's been given to them. However, whenever hard times befall upon them, they don't turn to God. And then there's others, the deathbed confessionals. They're the ones that when everything's bad and going south, those are the ones that turn to God. But whenever everything's going great for them, they don't even speak His name. And that's one thing that I've really had to work on and look at is through the good and the bad, God is always there no matter what. One of the classes I took earlier, a lot earlier, they taught us about salvation through suffering. You know, as much as it breaks my heart, and I don't like it, and I don't really agree with it, but I know it's God's will, and I accept that, is when something bad happens to a child, cancer, death, anything. I understand it's a part of life. It happens. It's ultimately sin. But I don't like it. I hate it, to be honest. However, the death of that child could be warranted to save 10, 15, 30, 100 people because of Facebook or the congregation of the church, the community just seeing it and seeing how everyone around them handles it. So, even during the bad times, God is still working with us and through us, or through someone else. And that's what brings us to our study. We're going to go to the book of Genesis. And this is one of my favorite stories. I love the little DreamWorks movie. You know, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Love it. Love the story of Joseph. Always have. But we're going to go to Joseph. And we're going to look at the bad times, the bad things that have fallen upon him. I mean, it was pretty rough for him, you know. His brother selling him into slavery, or first throwing him into the pit, then selling him into slavery. But then it looks up for him, because then he gets picked up by Potiphar, who is an amazing man at the time. Treats him very, very well. Brings him into his home. And Potiphar trusts him with all of his belongings, everything that he has. Has him sort it, count it. You know, everything in that house was pretty much Joseph's to do with what he wanted. He was like a member of the family at that point. There was only one thing in that house that Joseph could not touch. That was Potiphar's wife. And Joseph was cool with it. He was 100% fine with it. Potiphar's wife was not. She wanted to be with Joseph. As we all know from history, most prosperous individuals in the 1700s were very heavy, very pale. This wasn't the case in Egypt, because the sun, the desert, that's just not that's not their body style, that's not their pigmentation. However, she was still attracted to Joseph in his physical form and what he did. And Joseph rebuked her time and time again. Joseph even explains to her that I am in charge of everything in this house. And the only thing that I can't have is you, and I'm fine with that. He never complained about it. He never wanted it. And the Bible reads that now Joseph was well built and handsome, going back to what I'd originally said. And after a while, his master's wife took notice to Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. Of course he refused. It's his master's wife. And not saying that the movie is 100% accurate, but in the movie, they were actually all right friends. You don't sleep with your buddy's wife. You just don't. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in this house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. Potiphar gave everything to Joseph, allowed him to do what he needed to do with it, took care of it. He then says, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though you spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Now, Joseph did exactly what he was supposed to do. He told her no, and no, and no. And yet, that didn't help. Because when she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here and slept with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. So she lied. And Potiphar was told of this. And instead of Joseph being put to death, God softened Potiphar's heart, took care of Joseph, because Joseph has done nothing but glorified God. Now, I'm not saying that this is a conditional love, because God's love for us is unconditional. We saw that in the Abrahamic covenant. We saw that in the covenant with Jesus Christ. He has given us so much and asked for nothing in return. So, God's doing this all for Joseph, all for Joseph, out of the goodness of his, or out of the kindness of his heart. That's the best way to put it, in a mortal's mindset. That's the best way I can describe it is, again, we're just mortal. We can't 100% understand what's going on with God. So, Joseph was thrown into prison. And God was always with Joseph, no matter what. He was always with him. Even in the favor of the eyes of the guards, Joseph was treated better. He was treated well as you could be in prison. And no matter what Joseph did in there, God made the guards turn a blind eye to pretty much anything that was going on. I mean, God was with Joseph even while he was in prison. You can see that when he interpreted the dreams of the two individuals that were in there with him. The cupbearer and the baker. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offered their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, had put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard was assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. God gave this ability to Joseph. Just like Joseph did with his brothers, he interpreted the dream. And as we'll see later with Pharaoh, he will interpret the dream. Joseph's God-given ability to interpret these dreams has gotten him, well, in and out of trouble, as we've seen in the past. I mean, if it wasn't for the baker, then Joseph would have stayed in there the whole entire time. However, it took some time for Joseph to get out. It took Pharaoh having his dream and Joseph interpreting it. I mean, Pharaoh went through so many people trying to get this dream interpreted. I mean, it was 2 full years had gone by. And Pharaoh had this dream. He was standing by the Nile. When out of the river, there came out 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. The Pharaoh woke up. He had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing up in a sleek stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them. That is when the chief cupbearer, this is 2 years later. I can barely remember people that I've met, a couple of days ago. This is 2 years later. But again, Joseph was no mere man either. Also, with the help of God, it's easy for him to be recalled. The chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with the servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream in the